And when he had gone a little further from there, and going on from there. I like the more descriptive in Mark. When he had gone a little farther from there, he saw other two brethren. He saw James, son of John, his brother. Okay, so I'm going to start with Mark, but and is from both. And going on from there, yeah, and is both. And, beginning in Mark, when he had gone a little farther, and I think from there is both, and going on from there, a little further from there, yeah, from there is both. I mentioned this before, but I'm going to say it again. Yes, he is calling his disciples here, but he already met them way earlier in John, long before John was put in prison, right after his temptation in the wilderness. So before he was baptizing with his disciples in John 4, even though it says, when therefore the Lord knew how the Pharisees had heard that Jesus made and baptized more disciples than John, though Jesus himself baptized not, but his disciples, Jesus' disciples, he left Judea and departed into Galilee. He must needs go through Samaria. He meets the woman. His disciples were gone away to the city to buy meat. Who are his disciples? This must be Andrew, who was one of John the Baptist's disciples who went and got Peter, and most likely James and John, and Philip and Nathaniel. So that's 6. He's got 6 disciples at this point. Yeah, so those are the disciples who are baptizing with him. But they must not be full-time, because that was before John the Baptist was put in prison, and this is definitely after. And now he's walking by and he's seeing them fishing. So they're not full-time following him. It might have been a short instance where they were following him. They went up to the feast with him, then they went back and they stopped in Samaria, got food. So those 6 disciples, Peter and Andrew, James and John, Philip and Nathaniel, they were his disciples for a time, but now they must not be following him, because he's calling them again. I'm like learning this as I'm reading it. This has to be afterwards, because now John is put in prison. Whereas before, they were baptizing with John the Baptist, not in prison. This has to be afterwards. Has to be. No doubt about it. Okay, it's just hard for me to believe, because I've never really seen it this way in any movies or heard anyone preach it this way. But, well, I guess this is why you need to read the Bible and not just listen to other people read it to you. So, where am I? He has to call James and John. When he had gone a little further from there, he saw us from both. And then in Mark, it just goes into naming them. James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother. Whereas in Matthew, it gives some more explanation. He saw other 2 brethren, and then names them. James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother. So I'm going to keep that from Matthew. Then it names both. James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother. James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother. Okay, both. James, the son is italicized, whereas only son is italicized. I'll have it in both, and I'll only have son italicized. James is from both. The only from Mark, because it's not italicized in Mark. And then son in both, but it is italicized in both. And then of Zebedee and John his brother, all from both. Son of Zebedee and John his brother. Now, who also were in the ship mending their nets. In a ship with Zebedee their father mending their nets. So I'm going to put that, it's much more descriptive in Matthew. In a ship with Zebedee their father. Who also, maybe I should put that. Who also were in the ship mending their nets. I don't want to put who also, because it's as if they're saying these guys were also in the ship with Peter and Andrew. But if it was saying who are also in the ship with their father, that would make sense. I'll just say in a ship with Zebedee their father from Matthew. So in the ship mending their nets is in Mark. In a ship mending their nets. So in is the only word that's going to be in both. Otherwise, it'll be all from Matthew. In, now, a ship with, in a ship. In a ship. Okay, ship is also in both. With Zebedee their father. Wait, Zebedee their father should be there. Mending, nope. And Zebedee their father is mentioned later on in Mark when they left. So I'll put Zebedee their father in both. No, it'll be reorganizing. No, I'm not gonna move it around. It'll make sense as I go on. Okay. With Zebedee their father, mending their nets, and he called them mending their nets. Mending their nets is both. No comma. There is a comma in Matthew. Zebedee their father. Okay, so I'm doing that comma from Matthew, and I'll put mending their nets from both. And then only from Matthew, and he called them. In Mark it says, and immediately he called them. So immediately is added in Mark. I'll put that. But it's a comma. I'll put it as it is from Matthew with a period and a new sentence. Nets, so I'm beginning Matthew at this period here, and is in both. Now, the word immediately is definitely only in Mark. Immediately. He called them. He called them as both, and it ends differently in different verses. He called them, colon, in Mark, and they left their father Zebedee. Whereas in Matthew, it's a period, and they immediately left the ship. I could use immediately he called them from Mark, and then also in Matthew, and they immediately left their nets. This is really annoying. It makes more sense as it is in Matthew, because in Mark it says, and immediately they forsook their nets, talking about Peter and Andrew. And then if I have it in a similar manner from Matthew, and immediately they left their nets and followed him, speaking about James and John. I'm going to do that. Called them, and they immediately. He called them. Immediately he called them? Mark? Yeah, I don't like how it's written in Mark. It makes more sense in Matthew, because he's saying he called them, and they immediately left their nets. Same thing with James and John. He called them, and immediately they left their nets as well. Does it really make a difference if it's when Jesus called them? I mean, if he sees them in their ship mending their nets, and he waits a few seconds or a few minutes until he's closer and then calls them, I don't think that's really important. What really matters is how quickly they responded, and they said, yes, we will follow you. So because of that, I think I'm going to take it from Matthew, not say he immediately called them, but instead say he just called them, and they immediately left their nets. So from Matthew, and he called them. I'm going to get rid of immediately. And he called them. I'll identify in the addresses that I'm going from one word to the next. Or maybe I should just say this is from Matthew. Since I'm using the wording from Matthew, I'm going to use the way it's explained in Matthew, which would be just the word and, their nets, and from both. He called them. Now I'm using from Matthew only, a period. And they immediately left the ship and their father. And they is from both. No, I take it back. I want this to be a new sentence, as it is in his calling of Peter and Andrew. And he called them, and then the colon from Mark, and then from both, and they left their father, so from both, and they left their father. Matthew, or Mark says their father Zebedee, but he was already named in Matthew, so I'm not going to name him again. I'll just say, and they left their father, left the ship and their father. Okay, I need to include that. The ship and from Matthew. Or I could say, left their father Zebedee in the ship with the hired servants. That makes sense. Left their father in the ship with the hired servants. Left their father. So left their father. That's all from Mark. If I go from Matthew. Left. I've skipped the ship, but I can put that later, because that's also in Mark. Zebedee in the ship. Yeah, in is only in Mark. I'll keep it as it is. If it's in both, I'll keep it in the colors for both, instead of saying it's only from one because I'm taking it from the beginning of that verse. And the other book doesn't have it at the beginning, so I'm not going to have it as if it's included. But it is included, so I'll keep it with the colors from both, that is. And they left their father, but in is only in Mark, so I will signify that. In, and then back to both. The ship, not and. But I will say in the ship with the hired servants. But that is only in Mark. With the hired servants, and went after him in Mark, and followed him. I'm going to say followed him. And is from both. Followed from Matthew. Him is from both. I just realized when Jesus was walking by the sea, and then he first called Peter and Andrew, it doesn't mention that they were in a ship, but it says that they were casting nets into the sea, so it's implied. And that implication is strengthened later on when he also goes a little bit further, and he saw other two brethren, James the son of Zebedee and John his brother. Right now, how I have it is just in a ship with Zebedee their father, mending their nets. But remember, I mentioned these words, who also were in the ship. that it didn't really make sense because I thought that it might be referring back to Peter and Andrew. I was right. I just didn't realize how important that was because it didn't dawn on me that it didn't mention that Peter and Andrew were in a ship. So because of that, I'm going to add that in here right between James the son of Zebedee and John his brother, right where it's supposed to be in verse 19 of Mark 1, who also were, and then in comes in, but that's from both, and then a from Matthew, ship. In this verse just from Mark, it seems like he's mainly talking about James, and then he's saying the son of Zebedee and John his brother, who were also in the ship with James. But it doesn't even mention his father. It mentions his father later when he says, and immediately he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the ship with the hired servants. So it makes way more sense when you exchange the word the from Mark with the word a from Matthew, so that it reads James the son of Zebedee and John his brother, who were also in a ship, and then if you add in from Matthew with Zebedee their father, it makes it clear that it's comparing these guys are in a ship just like Peter and Andrew. So just those three words, who were also, I'm adding that in there when I didn't have it before.